Molecular Theology of DNA. Lecture 4. Divine Numerics in DNA. In this fourth lecture in Molecular Theology, Professor Dr. C.A.Ninan explains the importance of the number 10 related to DNA patterns on the one hand and to the tree of life model of DNA on the other. The 1 and 0 as letters of the tree of life at its alpha and omega positions, or alpha beta numerics, symbols of life. Alpha beta numerics means they are alphabets and numerics at once. This number 10 is related to the basic patterns of DNA itself as the radius of DNA helix, that is 10 Armstrong. As the number 10 of the base pairs in 1/3 of the helix and as a potential circle as defined by 1/3 of the helix with a number 1 of third at 0 of the helix. Finally, he relates the number 10 to the genetic code to the number 64, to the genetic code 64, which strangely adds up to 10. 6 and 4 makes 10. 10 is thus related to the DNA patterns, the genetic code, and finally to the supreme principle of life as God, because as the God number of various religions is based on number 10, as explained by Professor Ninan in detail in this lecture.
Molecular Theology of DNA, Lecture 4. In the last lecture, I have presented an elaborate table of the tree of life. A perusal of this table at once reveals that the tree of life is oriented on the number 7. The number 7, in a numerological sense, is the vehicle of life, the number presenting the vehicle of life. Now, there are equally or perhaps more important numbers related to this tree of life model, to which I am coming today. In fact, the letters I, capital I, small I, plus A, H, S, O has the first number, first letter as capital I, which is also numerically the digit or number 1. And the last letter in this series is the letter O, which in mathematical terms is a 0. So, considering these two symbols, I and O, as digits, their numerical value is 1 and 0, which together make the number 10. And the number 10 is a very, very important number in relation to the concept of God of all various religions. I shall first bring out the importance of the number 10 in the pattern of organization of the DNA molecule itself. This is done through the introduction of a figure, that is figure 1-2, a unit length of DNA as given on page 5 of my book Cosmic Code of Life, reproduced here. Examination of this figure reveals that it presents only one turn of the helix stretched out. It is a ladder of 10 steps or 10 base pairs, number 1. Number 2, it is a coil with 10 base pairs. Number 3, it defines a potential circle with 10 base pairs. Number 4, the radius of the helix is 10 angstroms. So there is a combination of 1 and 0 which together make the number 10, which is present in the DNA in relation to one turn of the helix. Okay. This one turn of the helix can also be represented through the figure 4.5 on page 37, which shows the inner fields in one turn of the helix, which I have named as the axon for the central axis portion and helixonic circle for one turn of the helix, which defines a potential circle. So you will find that the number 10 is basic to pattern organization in DNA in relation to one turn of the coil as well as the general organization of the DNA molecule. This introduces the concept of numerical value of DNA for studies on the nature and the meaning of life. And coming to the importance of numerics, you might seem that it is unimportant, but many intellectuals have said about the importance of numerics. I shall present here the views of Roger Penrose, Rouse Ball Professor of Mathematics at Oxford. I shall quote him. Rouse Ball, Professor of Mathematics, Oxford, speaks on the conscious activity comes into play whenever the objective reductionist activity comes into play and whenever the brain is operating at deeper levels of reality. So these are very important points. So that this is the context under which he has given the following words. I shall read it once again. According to Roger Penrose, conscious activity comes into play whenever the objective reductionist activity comes into play. Here we have reduced the DNA molecule to letters and numbers. That is the reductionist activity, and it starts from the objective DNA patterns. Whenever the objective reductionist activity comes into play and whenever the brain is operating at a deeper levels of reality. Actually, the tree of life model of DNA itself is the outcome of activity of the brain at the deeper level of reality. So it is a model-oriented realism, so to say. Model-oriented realism. Now I quote. He states, to understand the mind of matter, that means that matter is mindful, matter has thought, as Karl Marx has said long ago. To understand the mind of matter, we need a deeper understanding about how physical laws operate. And for that, we have to look beyond the kind of physics we have today. He is speaking about in the context of physics. Simply understanding a few equations would not do. If understanding can be shown beyond computation, then intelligence also would be beyond computation. That means we are into awareness and other objective truths. Contending that consciousness itself can be understood only in terms of physical laws, Professor Penrose stated that in mathematics there is a rule known as the Golden Theorem, which states that the perception of mathematical truth cannot be reduced to a set of mechanical rules. That really means you have to leap beyond the perceivable. You have to leap beyond the perceivable using your insight and understanding. So we are coming to a stage of insight and understanding. Golden tells us, said Professor Penrose, that no system of computational rules can characterize the property of natural numbers. These are always non-standard models. In fact, the problem can essentially be posed in a different way. With any system of rules, how do you know that these rules are good? The answer is you need to have insight, and insight comes from understanding. See, he points out the importance of incisive insight into the nature of things to understand reality as related here to DNA. That is the reality of how consciousness is organized in DNA. You have to follow different methods. We have here followed the alphabetic method, wherein you reduce DNA patterns to 7 letters, and now we are coming to the numeric method, which is the topic of today's discussion. Now, natural numbers are also agents of unification. In fact, psychologists consider numbers as spontaneous products of the unconscious, serving as agents of unification. You see, psychologists point out the importance of natural numbers as spontaneous products of the unconscious, serving as agents of unification. M.L. von Franz, in the chapter Science of the Unconscious in Jung's Man and His Symbols, a famous book called Man and His Symbols, wrote that among many mathematical primary ideas, the natural numbers seem psychologically the most interesting. Not only do they serve our conscious everyday measuring and counting operations, they have for centuries been the only existing means for reading the meanings of such ancient forms of divination as astrology, numerology, geomancy, etc., all of which are based on arithmetical computations, and all of them have been investigated by Jung's theory of synchronicity. Synchronicity is the meaningful overlapping of outer material and inner mental events, which keep to bridge the material with the mental events and phenomena. See, here the importance is to relate the material to the mental. This is what we are doing with the DNA patterns. So, we are relating the DNA pattern archetypes to the mental and to the spiritual and to the divine, as we see when we progress with these discussions. How natural numbers linked to genetic code provide important insights which help us to understand consciousness as life principle and creativity as proceeding from it will be explained later. Today we confine to the DNA architecture, to the numbers related to the DNA architecture, of which 1 and 0 are the base numbers. Interestingly enough, these together make the number 10. And number 10, according to the scholars on numerics, is the number of ordinal perfection. Number 10 is the number of ordinal perfection. And now another importance of the number 10 is that it is the number of God, or the God number of various religions, which I shall present below. Number 1, 10 avatars of the God in Hindu scriptures. 2, 10 potencies of Godhead, that is Sephiroth. It is called Sephiroth of Kabbalah. Number 3, 10 letters of the biblical I am that I am, that is the name of God revealed to Moses. That is, I am that I am together make 10 letters. 10 plagues sent to Egypt by God are seen in the book of Genesis. Now, 10 eternal qualities of God as defined in yogic texts. 10 vital layers that inspire the being of the sacred Gayatri. 10 vital layers that animate the human body. 10 wings of the Chinese I Ching as seen in the book of Changes. 10 deities of the Japanese Shinto. 10 stages of Buddhahood. 10 classes of deities of the Tibetans. 10 commandments of Yahweh of the Bible. 10 adults constituting the basic quorum of the congregation of Israel for full liturgical proceedings. See, 10 is related to various religions in relation to the God concept of these religions. Now, the number 10 is linked to the Temple of Jerusalem, the diameter of the molten sea, the number of oxen, levers, candlesticks of gold, tables on either side of the sea near the altar, etc. Then, height in cubits of the altar is 10, diameter of the molten sea is 10, number of oxen 10, number of laves 10, number of candlesticks of gold 10, number of tables on either side of the molten sea 10. Then 10 as basis of the rod and ring symbols of the Bible. 10 pass to Kundalini Yoga, 10 as the Vedic Purusha number, 10 as related to 1/10 as tithe to God, that is the Samsam in Malayalam. First 1 and the last 0 symbols of the tree of life as already mentioned. Now, the above God number 10 further reduces to the Supreme Self number 1, that is 1 plus 0 equals 1. The 1 and 0 symbols are at once alphabets of English and numerals 1 and 0, as I have already stated. In other words, they are alphabeto-numeric symbols of life and divinity in one. You see, they are alphabeto-numeric symbols of life and divinity in one. This agrees with the concept of the Church that God is life. The 1 and 0 symbols strangely stand at the alpha and omega positions of the tree of life codes, which I have already mentioned. These are also numeric symbols of the biblical rod and ring and appear as binary values 1 and 0 in digital information coding. All numbers linked to DNA and the genetic code are also linked to God. And God is life, and creativity proceeds from life as God. Creativity is a higher faculty of life. It is life that creates. It is interesting to know in this connection that this number 10 is related to the genetic code in very strange ways. The genetic code actually is made up of 64 triplets. And the number 64 is a very interesting numerically in that 6 plus 4 add up to 10, the God number 10. And 1 and 0 add up 1 and 0 of 10 add up to the number 1 is the basic God number, the one true God. You see. So that is the importance of the number 64 of triplets of the genetic code, which is the basis of life. That is also based on the number 10, number 1, 10 and 64. From 64 comes the number 10 and from 10 comes the number 1. And another important number linked to divinity is the number 3 of the Trinity, which again is related to the genetic code. Genetic code consists of triplets, 64 triplets. And it is said that these triplets are not evolved in the 1, 2, 3 fashion, but they are frozen at the triplet level. So it is frozen at the triplet level. And the geneticist P. Gavaudan, in his important paper presented at the International Genetic Congress at The Hague, I remember, he presented a very crucial paper on the genetic code, concluding that the code is dictated and edificated in ways which are quite unknown. The code is genetic code. It is frozen at the triplet level, is dictated and edificated in ways which are quite unknown. He was not able to explain it. We will certainly explain it in the next lecture. Thank you.